2025 at the Town Hall, Great Hall Meeting Room. We are in a hybrid format with COPC members in the room, and I see a number of them online via Zoom. So first things I'd like to do is call the roll, since we are hybrid, to make sure we have a quorum. Beginning with Precinct 1.
Christine Pratt, Precinct 1. Good evening.
Precinct 2, Matt Tavares, myself. Precinct 3.
Dale Weber, Precinct 3, where it all began.
Precinct 4.
Precinct 4, Claire Montanari.
Precinct 5.
Precinct 5, Mike Leary.
Precinct 6, absent. Precinct 7 is actually, I'm going to stop the roll for a second. I did receive notice late this afternoon, early this evening, that Precinct 7 chair is now vacant. And I know everything's kind of just happened this afternoon, that they're working on a reorganization meeting to elect a new chair. Precinct 8.
Precinct 8, George McKay.
Precinct 9.
Precinct 9, Catherine Holmes.
Precinct 10.
Precinct 10, Alan Costello.
Precinct 11.
Precinct 11, Frank O'Brien.
Precinct 12.
Precinct 12, Pat Adelman.
Precinct 13. Absent. Precinct 14.
Precinct 14, Tom Begley.
Precinct 15. Absent. Precinct 16.
Precinct 16, Pompey Delafield.
Precinct 17.
Joe Hutchinson.
And Precinct 18.
Precinct 18, Carmen Lee Frieri, in the middle of it all.
Okay. And it looks like we actually have Precinct 13 and Precinct 15 coming in currently right now. Thank you, gentlemen. Okay, that being done, we do have a quorum, so if you could all please stand with me and do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the
United States of America.
to the republic for which it stands,
Just stands one
God,
nation,
indivisible,
God.
with liberty and
Liberty
justice for all.
Justice for all.
Okay, thank you. The first order of business we're going to get out of the way here is the approval of the meeting minutes from February 10th, 2025.
Motion to accept.
Motion to accept by Mr. Brewster. Is there a second? Second. Seconded by Mrs. Montanari. Discussion. Seeing none, I'll call the roll because we are in hybrid format. Precinct 1.
Approve.
Precinct 2, yes. Precinct 3.
Approved.
Precinct 4.
Approve.
Precinct 5. Mr. Leary?
Yes.
Precinct 6, absent. Precinct 7, vacant. Precinct 8.
Approve.
Precinct 9.
Approve.
Precinct 10.
Precinct 10, yes.
Precinct 11.
Precinct 11, yes.
Precinct 12.
Precinct 12, yes.
Precinct 13.
Precinct 13, yes.
Precinct 14.
Yes.
Precinct 15. Russell?
Yes.
Precinct 16.
Abstain.
Precinct 17.
Approve.
Precinct 18.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. This evening, we have a very aggressive number of articles we're going to get through this evening. I appreciate within the room here a number of department heads here to answer any questions that the Committee of Precinct chairs may have. I appreciate you coming out on a very cold and in some areas of the town snowy evening. But we will begin this evening I believe with Lynn Barrett, our finance director, and Derek Brindisi, our town manager, I know they're kind of dividing up and conquering this. So the floor is open to either of you with whoever's going to start. Mr. Brindisi.
Great. Good evening, everyone. Derek Brindisi, town manager. Make sure this is working. Okay, so the presentation that's before you tonight is the FY26 proposed budget. This budget is similar to the initial presentation that went to the Select Board back in December. This was the same proposal with some slight modifications that was presented to Advisory and Finance Committee, the School Committee, and again, the Select Board at our joint meeting a few weeks back. The one thing, caveat in today's presentation, there were a few changes that were made last night by the Advisory and Finance Committee. Those, again, minor changes are not reflected in tonight's budget. But in total, it was a $6,700 decrease in the town clerk's budget and a $15,000 decrease in the procurement budget. So those are the two modifications that were made last night. Again, not reflective in tonight's presentation. This is the typical presentation we've done the last couple of years, and as you all know, since '22, the Select Board they go through a goal-setting process each and every summer. What you'll hear today as far as the budget proposal is embedded in many of the board's goals and priorities. So I have two slides here this evening. I'm not going to read it to you, but if you take a few minutes to just read this slide, everything you see on the slide, our departments and division heads are actively pursuing. All of those items that are listed there are actively in process. And again, a lot of this stuff will carry over into the FY26 budget. And again, you'll see a lot of what our budget proposal is reflective in supporting the Select Board's goals. Just as a reminder, how we go through our goal-setting process. So we work with the departments. They establish a set of priorities for their respective departments. The things that they see fit to, again, to make progress in this community, to advance this community. Those are presented to the Select Board. The Select Board then inserts the items that they would like to see. Some of the items that the departments come up with, they may modify or they may subtract. And that's how we get to the final product. So it's a two-way process. It starts from the bottom, works its way up, and then ends its way at the top, and then works its way back down to the departments. So again, everything here on this slide, and this is just a fraction of the various goals. If I were to guess, we'd probably have at least 50 goals in FY25. You can find the comprehensive list on the town website. So jumping into the budget, what I always focus my discussion on first and foremost is the new revenues. Oftentimes we get lost in the overall budget, but I always like to focus on what are the new revenues, because the new revenues is what is going to give us our left and right limits. It's going to force us to live within those means. And so you can see right here that when we look at new growth in raising the 2.5%, which is allowable under Prop 2.5, we have almost $8.5 million in new revenue. This year we budgeted almost 2.3 in local receipts, indirects are $90,000. So when we looked at this year's budget, and again, we went back to this past summer, it was myself, Mr. Canty, our vice chair, our chairman, Mr. Quintal, Adam Blaisdell, the school superintendent, and a number of school committee members started having these conversations very early on. We didn't want to repeat some of the confusion that we had in last year's budget process. So we went back to last summer and we started to have conversations about how we were going to split the new revenue, what the new revenue was going to look like in FY26. And honestly, that was a very collaborative process. I thank the school department and the school committee for their efforts, for the fact that they were able to balance their budget and live within their 61%. Really speaks to their commitment to the taxpayers. And the same can be said for our department heads. So again, $10.8 million in new revenue. During those conversations during the summer months, we looked at, Ms. Barrett also attended those meetings, and she had done the analysis and said, listen, based upon the current makeup of today's budget, 61% of the budget goes to education, and the other 39% goes to the town. So we're going to split all new revenues using those two percentages. And so again, that really set the stage for this year's budget process. So 61% towards education, 39% towards towns. And so when we look at how much money was available to spend, after we looked at the distribution, Ms. Barrett then subtracted the fixed costs off that top. And then obviously, as you know, we have cherry sheet assessments, which is a reduction as well. And so the bottom line number you can see at the very bottom, what was available for both schools to spend for their increased operating costs was approximately $2.8 million on the town side and approximately $5.8 million on the school side. So again, I'll probably repeat myself over and over tonight. $2.8 million is not a lot of money when you look at fire, police, DPW, and trying to maintain those operations. And quite frankly, $5.8 million is not a lot of money on the school side in trying to maintain operations, increase utility costs, increase costs to salary and benefits, so on and so forth. So this is just a slide, just a breakdown of the budget in FY25, what was proposed. You can see the year-over-year change, the dollar change. So you get the general on Article 5, which I know is what I'm presenting this right now. There was an increase of $10 million from the prior year. And then the offsets from the prior year. And then you can look at, and I know we'll talk about these later, the enterprise accounts. And so you have the FY25 budget, and the left-hand column, the 26 proposal, and then the fourth column to the right is the 2026 proposal with the year-over-year change in the fifth column to the right. So enterprise, water, solid waste, airport, and cable access. So the total increase from last year's budget to this year's budget represents a 3.6% increase, and that is approximately $11,300,000. I just want to make a comment, just because I always have to throw Worcester in there. There was an article in the newspaper yesterday, Worcester's school department increase went up 8%. So when you look at what we have been able to accomplish this year with a 3.6% increase on the school and the town side, again, a lot of credit goes back to the school department and our various departments for being able to come in within the revenues that we are appropriated. And so again, I just went through this, but the general fund budget went up $10 million with some cherry sheet offsets, 10.9. Enterprise was $420,000, so again, $11.3 million from last year. So this was a controversial slide a few weeks back. Many Advisory and Finance Committee members want us to change this slide in the future. But this slide really, again, represents the 39% on the town side and the 61% on the school side. What the discussion was like with Advisory and Finance Committee was the Plymouth Public Schools in this year's budget is about $127 million. And so the balance of the $127 million goes towards other educational expenses. And so I think, although we've used this slide in the past, what we plan on doing in the future is breaking out what those other educational expenses are. So for example, the charter school is another educational expense that we have to pay. So next year, we'll break out specifically the Plymouth Public Schools and our other education expenses. So it's very clear what folks are discussing. And then you can see the columns to your left. Those are the breakouts of expenses versus salaries versus fringe, and the debt on both sides of the house. So again, slide we've presented it each and every year, but where do our revenues come from? As you know, property taxes represent 73% of our revenues. State aid represents 11%. Local receipts represent 7%. Enterprise funds represent 7%, and then other expenses, other revenues are 2%. I'd have to say that when we had this discussion last year at this time, the governor's budget proposal was weak. Is an understatement for what they had proposed for the town of Plymouth. It was about $180,000 increase on the school and the town side, the net new increase. So thankfully, through the state legislature last year, they were able to increase the state aid by a little north of $1 million. And that helped us dramatically last year to not have to go back to town meeting and seek an additional raise and appropriation. The additional state aid that came through the legislature was able to help us balance last year's budget. And as you know, last fall was the big year. We had to balance the budget because of the collective bargaining agreements that were settled over the course of the summer. So this year's governor's budget is better than last year's. I want to say, off the top of my head, it's a net increase of about $500,000 to schools and a little north of $100,000 on the town side. So hopefully the state legislature pulls through again, and we can get north of $1 million. So what are some of our budget drivers? As you all know, salaries and fringe, our people, represent 70% of our costs. Expenses represent 23%, and then debt represents 7%. And so when we think about the rising costs to deliver services, as you can see, it really comes down to personnel costs. And so when we think about wanting to cut back on the budget, wanting to save some of that 2.5%, what we're really saying is that we have to start cutting into personnel. And when we start cutting personnel, what we're really saying is that we're cutting services. So when you reduce the DPW by a sum of personnel, or our fire department a sum of personnel, you are reducing services. You're reducing our ability to respond for calls of service, our ability to plow the roads, our ability to pick up the phone at the treasurer collector's office. So, and then the debt payments are fixed. So that is not an area that we can cut as well. And then you would say, okay, well, you have a 23% of expenses. So that's an area to make cuts. Well, I would argue that expenses, really, it's our utilities, it's our training costs, it's our fuel costs for our vehicles. And so there's not a lot of flexibility in there to reduce expenses as well, because you need to keep the lights on, you need to keep the vehicles going, so on and so forth. And so at the end of the day, you got pen and paper. You're not going to balance a $325 million by cutting pen and paper. So moving forward on this year's budget, these are some of the articles that we'll discuss today. Like last year, the select board supported an increase, an appropriation of $500,000 to the nuclear stabilization account last year. They did it again this year at $500,000. The same goes with the facility capital stabilization account. Last year, the select board recommended an appropriation of $500,000. Again, they recommended an appropriation of $500,000. And so one of the biggest complaints, as you can imagine, we get each and every year are our roads. The inability in the past to really put substantial resources behind our road improvement program. Although we've had, I think we borrowed $15 million in the past 5 years, Lynn. So that's a substantial improvement to where we were, say, 7 or 8 years ago. But the select board really felt like this is an area of weakness, and we got to continue to invest in our street and sidewalk program. Last year, we spent approximately $6 million on streets and sidewalks because of the $1.5 million that was appropriated last year. This year, we are also want to appropriate an additional $1,500, or 2.6, I should say, overall into the street and sidewalk program. So again, a continued investment into the streets and sidewalks. We have the fourth largest road network in Massachusetts, and so clearly, we need considerable resources to make improvements on that. And I believe our road rating went up this past year, correct, Mr. Coyle? Our road rating went up because of that. So we'll continue to make that investment as long as town meeting continues to support those recommendations. So again, I mentioned a little bit about state aid. We got the governor's budget that came out a couple of weeks ago. If we continue to see, hopefully, increases through the legislative budget process, as always, we plan to split those new revenues by the 61-39 split. And so, we'll continue to watch that process throughout the spring, and usually ends around midsummer point. So here are some budget highlights. I mentioned that this budget really focuses on the Select Board's goals and priorities. It focuses on investing in long-term infrastructure like our road program. It continues to invest in our stabilization accounts. We do have one position that we're adding this year. This is for the Assistant Finance Director position. This is part of one of our goals of succession planning. As you all know, we've started that process in a number of departments in the past, with Police Department first, Planning Department second, and now the Finance Department next, to have a succession plan for when our longtime administrators decide to retire. Controversial, at least of last night, controversial, elimination of the lifeguards at White Horse Beach. So last year, we went from 7 days of guarding the beach down to 3 days of guarding the beach. This year, we're moving to a different model where we wouldn't have lifeguards at the beach, but we would have a beach supervisor there that would be in constant communication with our public safety personnel. This is the second year of the collective bargaining agreement. We've come to agreement with all but one union so far. So this is the second year that we'll fund that. This is the third year of the PEC agreement. This third year, we will save $1.5 million because of that agreement. If you remember, we saved in year one of that agreement a little north of $3 million. That's a 6-year agreement. And quite frankly, a lot of credit goes to the Select Board for negotiating that. But that agreement is a historic agreement. When you look at the life of that agreement, we'll save over $20 million in savings because of that. And again, credit goes to the unions because they agreed to that. So a lot of credit all around for the PEC agreement. And because of the PEC agreement, our OPEB liability has gone down. So back in 22, our liability was $941 million. Because of the PEC agreement, it's gone down to $567 million. This year, we are recommending a contribution to the OPEB trust fund of $1.3 million. And then again, this also, we have a commitment to achieve the 5% benchmark in our general stabilization account. So we will continue to invest in that year over year until we can reach that, that benchmark. So I'm going to close. There's just a couple things I just want to mention. When the town departments submitted their budgets, we asked them to submit a level service budget. We asked them to focus on the Select Board's goals and priorities, and then also consider what they also need to advance their department. And after we received their requests, I said we had $2.2 million of new revenue. We had requests of over $4 million in requests. And so we had to pare that down just to live within our means. And even after paring down those budget requests, we still had a deficit of about $350,000. And so this year, we implemented a new program called a vacancy factor, where it empowers our department heads to manage their budgets. So when you have $350,000 debt, going back to one of my previous conversations, the only real way to cover that debt is to cut personnel. So we would have been looking at $350,000 with the layoffs. But instead, we said, let's do a vacancy factor. So basically, we put a negative in certain departments that had existing vacancies, like the DPW and the police department, just two examples, and we said, you have a deficit of $100,000 when you start your budget on July 1st. This is an example. And so that requires the department not to have to lay folks off, but have to manage their budget to close that $100,000 deficit, if that makes sense. And so it empowers the department heads to manage their budgets without having to cut services. So that's something new that we implemented this past year. If we have to do it in years to come, we certainly would do it, but it certainly it was what we used to balance the town size budget. So I appreciate those departments that have to contend with a vacancy factor, because it's the first time that they'll have to deal with that. And I want to thank, I know Adam's here from the school department, I want to thank the school superintendent and the school committee, because without their efforts and their collaboration, we would not be able to accomplish this evening. So, pending any questions, I'm here to answer them.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Brindisi, and I know that we have a lot of department heads here and stuff, so I kind of will allow the questions to flow from the COPC that way, in the room and then also online. But I saw, Mr. Weber, you had your hand up, so if you'd like to go first.
I did, thank you. Dale Weber, Precinct 3, question for the town manager. Early in your budget presentation, you made note of the fact that personnel cuts equals service level cuts. So how do you square that with the vacancy, by using the vacancy factor and keeping those personnel cuts that have already happened through attrition or other means? How do you square the fact that you've already got over 64 vacancies in two divisions, police and DPW? So you're acknowledging that you've identified in this budget a service cut to the taxpayers for what their expectations are for maintenance or public safety, and you're allowing the department heads to use that vacancy factor instead of making certain requests, but they can fund their operation by not filling those 64 positions. Is that accurate?
I would say the last statement, yeah, is accurate, that in order to fund their operation, they have a deficit. They begin their budget year on July 1st in a deficit. And so, you know, for some departments, DPW in particular, it has like 20 vacancies. The department head can then, again, empowering the department head to make those decisions. Which positions are we going to fill right out of the gate on July 1st? Which positions have we been trying to fill for 3 years, like the town engineer? And so some of those positions they may delay in order to fill that deficit. So it gives them the ability to determine which services they need to deliver on immediately and which ones they can maybe hold back a little bit until they fill that gap. Because the alternative to that is, to your first point, Mr. Weber, attrition is probably been hurting this community over the years, because when we have deficits, in the past, we'd say, well, this position has gone unfilled for a couple of years, so we're just not going to fill it, and then it goes away. So there's no money there to fill it, right? Or, a person retired, so we're just not going to fill that position. So instead of doing that again this year, which we could have done that, we just could have gone through attrition, says we're going to pick 3 positions out of the DPW, and we're just not going to fund them. We says, no, we're going to keep those 3 positions in the department budget, in the department's organization, but they won't have as much money to fill them immediately. So it was our way to try to be a little bit more creative with the revenue that we had, but at the same time, not cut any deeper into department personnel, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So at the end of the fiscal year, are these positions, if they're not filled, are they going to fall off?
They are not going to fall off, no. No,
They'll
they
be
will
carried into the budget for fiscal '27
Well,
as funded positions to be filled?
they'll be carried in FY '26. I don't have a crystal ball to project what our FY '27 revenues would look like, but let's just pretend for a minute that we have consistent revenues and consistent expenses of last year. The answer to your question is yes, they would carry forward.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Before we move on, I just want to remind the members that are on Zoom, the local scene has asked if you aren't speaking to go on to mute, because I think we're picking up some background noise there, and it's bleeding through to the live stream and then also out to the general public. So thank you. Any further questions from the CPC? Mr. Riley?
Ron Riley, Precinct 13. While we're talking positions, you had mentioned about assistant positions for succession, which I would like to, if we could have a vote to not let Lynn retire.
We've taken that vote, but we haven't convinced her yet.
Are these temporary positions? It doesn't say that, so these will be permanent, so we'll have 2 positions. Each time we hire someone for succession, they stay on board, or is this a...
So that's a great question. I don't know the answer to that yet. We are looking at all operations differently. Certain departments are taking on more work. So, for example, the police department is taking on a considerable amount more work because of post. And so we wouldn't be looking to eliminate, for example, the deputy police chief position because of that. And the planning director's deputy position was created from a retirement of the previous town planner, so we wouldn't be looking to reduce that organization either. With the finance department, I think time will tell. Hopefully we can find somebody that can fill Ms. Barrett's shoes, and then we'll make that decision down the road like we do every year. Do we need this position in this department, or can we consolidate 2 other positions to make 1 position? So it's difficult to answer because each department is very different.
Okay, any further questions for Mr. Brindisi here? Mr. McKay?
I received a letter in the mail from the Contributory Retirement Board recently, and it went out to all town meeting members. And this is the first time in probably 18 years that I believe they've sent one out, and it talks about benefits for retirees. The last time we had a budget analysis a year ago, the school made a comment that they were having trouble getting new teachers and being competitive in the current wage cycle. And one of the reasons they said they didn't have enough money in their budget to do that was because, and these are my words, not theirs, they were overly generous with their retirement benefits. That's my recollection. I want to know if this letter has anything to do with that, or is it a broader letter? And I really didn't understand the whole process here, because it's the first time I've ever seen a letter from them.
So I'll turn over the response to the letter to Ms. Barrett, because I know she serves on the retirement board. But as far as the comment about the benefits for retirees to be overly generous, well, I guess that's somebody's opinion. But what I would say that our retiree health insurance program is built upon a special act that was passed in the, what year was that, dear Mr. Weber? What year was that special act passed?
That was 2003.
2003, a special act was passed that allows employees upon retirement to revert back to their health insurance percentage breakout from the first day they started. So, for example, if you started at a 80% town contribution, 20% employee contribution, and then you retire, and we'll say it's a 60-40 split in 20 years from now, on the day of your retirement, you go back to 80-20. So that is unique to the town of Plymouth. So maybe that's what folks believe is overly generous.
Ms. Barrett?
Excuse me, as far as the letter that was sent out, it's a requirement of the retirement board. If the retirement board is considering a COLA adjustment that is greater than the CPI or cost of living increase that happened within that same year, then we are to notify the legislative body of that increase. And in this particular year, The COLA that we are going to be recommending is a 3% COLA, which is consistent with what we have done every year, but the cost of living increase or the CPI increase for those years was greater than 3%, either 3% or greater. If the cost of living increase that we're recommending is greater than the most recent one, which I think is about 2.5%, there was a letter that went out today that clarifies it for town meeting members. So it's a requirement of the retirement board to notify you that we are holding our COLA meeting, which is a public meeting, and anyone can attend. And this did happen in my 17 years. It did happen one other time, and that letter went out, and we had some town meeting members come to the meeting. So it's just that it just all depends on if that cost of living increase is either greater or less than the 3% recommended COLA that we're going to recommend. Does that help answer the question? So, just so you know, the 3% is based on the $16,000 base retirement. So the maximum that anyone's retirement is going to increase, anyone's from this particular, from the Plymouth retirement system is like $498. That's it. So it's a very small portion. And the average retirement allowance for the Plymouth retirees is about a little less than $28,000 a year.
Mrs. Adelman and then Mr. Brewster. Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Blaisdell, would you like to respond on behalf of the schools?
Sure. Adam Blaise, I'm the school business administrator for the schools. We have had a hard time attracting teachers in the past due to our salaries. We just had a very successful negotiations with our teachers, and our salaries have risen, and what we were doing is we were losing teachers to other towns because our pay was lower. So we're hoping that with our new contract, that we worked very closely with the EAPC, that we're able to attract and retain more and more teachers. Also, in addition, when we're looking at our per pupil, when you look at how they break down our per pupil, one of the things that was extremely high in comparison to other towns was just the insurance piece when you look at our per pupil. If you were to reduce some of the insurance pieces to where some of the other towns are, our per pupil is actually lower. But that per pupil, when you look at the expenses for insurance, that brings us about $700 above the state average right now. So that really that portion of our per pupil is extremely high in comparison to other towns.
Thank you. Mrs. Adelman and then Mr. Brewster. Pat, you're on mute.
Sorry about that, and I apologize for the background noise. I had a question about eliminating the lifeguards. I always thought that the cost of the stickers covered the cost of lifeguards, and I'm wondering if it's a cost problem or a difficulty in hiring lifeguards. Thank you.
Sure. Mr. Merdisi, were you able to hear the question, or do you?
I think it was a question about hiring versus cost.
Was it a hiring problem or is it a cost problem? I think, Mrs. Adelman, you can correct me if I'm wrong.
This is not a proposal to reduce salaries as a cost reduction measure. Quite frankly, as you all know, public safety, public health is paramount in all of our budget priorities. But you know, we're working with Commissioner Brady, who's here this evening, who certainly can provide some detail. When we look at, over the last couple of years, the number of users on this 500-foot section of White Horse Beach that is public, 2 years ago, we had reduced the coverage time from 7 days a week down to 3 days a week. And what we have found is that that area that's being guarded is not heavily occupied. And then couple that with really, over the last 5 years, trying to find, hire, train qualified lifeguards is becoming extremely difficult, very, very difficult. And so, we made an operational decision that, given the fact that we don't know if we could, even if we had the funds available, if we could be able to hire lifeguards to cover this area, we thought it was best to move in a different direction with this beach supervisor model. We would have somebody there the same hours that we would have a lifeguard there that would have radios, have contact with public safety, with EMS. And if they found something that was unruly, they could certainly call PD. If they found somebody in distress, they could certainly call the fire department. So that's why we're proposing this model. It's not a cost reduction measure. The police department will continue to patrol it like they always have in the past. Michelle, I don't know if you want to add anything else to that.
Thank you. Thank you,
Respond?
Derek. He very much eloquently said it all, but I just will reiterate in regards to White Horse Beach staff. When we really looked at capacity, White Horse Beach is 7,128 feet, and we are responsible for lifeguard duty for 560 feet, or 8% of the beach. We do not guard 92% of the beach. So when we looked at lifeguard personnel, we looked at how frequently were people utilizing those 560 feet space within our lifeguard in White Horse Beach. Also, changes in the parking district and the parking restrictions. We had seen a trend. They've resulted in making it a little more difficult, not in a bad way, but just changing the scope of the public accessing the beach. So we think that's why the numbers are down as well in terms of who's actually swimming in our 560 feet area. So we just thought it'd be more prudent when we look at need-based as well. We look at other bodies of water in Plymouth that we lifeguard, that we have a public safety responsibility for. And when we look at those areas, they're heavily populated. So it would be prudent also to look at efficiency of our lifeguard staff, the ones we do hire. So any other questions, I'm happy to answer, but that's the crux of the lifeguard.
Sure. Ms. Adelman, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, would the supervisor be a lifeguard? I'm concerned that if somebody's in distress in the water, a supervisor calling emergency, they're too late.
So
That's all.
I think Ms. Alman was kind of breaking up there, but I think the gist of her question was, is this supervisor also trained like a lifeguard, CPR, et cetera?
So actually, some of our I won't confuse you, but some of our beach supervisors are, but you have to have a 2-person to 3-person ratio. There has to be multiple numbers when you're in lifeguard status. So in that capacity, they are not. But again, 92% of the beach is not staffed with lifeguards, and it is a swim at your own risk capacity. So to place 3 to 4 guards in this small section doesn't cover the bulk of the beach, if that makes sense.
Yep. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Brewster.
Yes, Lynn, I tried to catch you when you were up here. Did you do the math on what this is going to mean to the average household as in the raising of taxes? Got a calculator out.
So while our finance director is crunching numbers, are there any further comments or questions from the committee, either online or within the room? Mr. LaFrari.
Thank you. I wanted to thank Mr. Brandisi for the information you shared. Going back to the slides on the school's debt, which showed currently 7%. I was wondering, Mr. Brandisi, if you could provide the debt value from last year and explain how the debt is being managed? Thank you.
I'll ask our finance director, Ms. Barrett, to come up and answer that question.
Thank you, Ms. Barrett. You can choose whether to answer Mr. Brewster or Mr. LaFrari first.
So I think I heard 7% and I heard the schools, so I'm a little confused about the question. What was the question exactly?
Sure.
About debt?
The slide showed a current debt of 7% in the pie chart.
Yep.
And I was wondering if you could provide the debt value from last year and explain how the debt is currently being managed.
So we have a fiscal policy, a financial management policy, that our debt service budget is going to be within 6 to 8% of our operating budget. So we always budget based on that. So any debt that's falling off, we would authorize new projects to fill in that debt that's falling off. So it's constantly looked at and managed on an annual basis based on those, the debt service that's falling off. And we would always live within that 6 to 8% range. You know, we wouldn't plan to do a project that would bring it over 8%, because then it's not going to be fiscally responsible in our particular managing of our debt. Any large project that would take it over that would be when we would consider doing a debt exclusion, because the debt exclusion would be outside of that sort of like policy. So I hope that answers that question. And then,
Mr. LaFrari, are you satisfied? I know you've hijacked Mr. Brewster's time, but I'm going to allow it.
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
All right, so back to Mr. Brewster's question.
so based on the estimated tax levy that's going to increase, and again, it is an estimate, and based on current values, so values not changing. And in Plymouth, that average home for 2025 is $586,000. So the approximate increase of taxes would be about $310 for that average home.
You good, Mr. Brewster? Okay. It's a rare occasion when you are. Are there any further questions from the COPC or either online or within the room? Not seeing any. Lynn, were you going to speak to the revolving funds this evening? Okay. All right. If you don't mind coming up, that would be great. Thank you.
So, and just in addition to the comments, in addition to the presentation that the town manager gave this evening, I think we emailed, Kristen emailed you all last week with some links to our website, because we keep the budget documents that are in more detail on the website. And again, Advisory and Finance just voted their recommended budget, so we'll update the website with that information and update the materials as we lead into town meeting. So in addition to the links for the budget documents, within that same email, we sent you the memo on the revolving funds. There are no new revolving funds within the annual town meeting request, so what it's the regular annual town meeting authorization for the spending limits for all the revolving funds that already exist. So that's what's happening at the annual town meeting. Again, this year, Advisory and Finance, when they met with the departments, in addition to their budget, they reviewed their revolving fund, and they've already voted a few weeks ago to recommend the revolving fund article for the annual town meeting. And if any department has any questions, there are department heads here tonight to answer any questions regarding those.
Right. And I hope that there are some from the committee, seeing how we have, I think, almost the entirety of Town Hall here this evening. So, which is wonderful to see, and I appreciate that. It hasn't happened in the past. And are there any questions from the COPC? Not seeing any, then I would congratulate all of you for doing such a great job. Where we don't, you've stumped the COPC, or they're satisfied with what they've seen. So I do appreciate you taking this evening to come in. Thank you so much. Anything further from the COPC before this room gets a little loud? No? Okay. Any specific article questions? I know there were a number that we kind of covered in broad here. And we will be bringing up a few others over the next two meetings. Not seeing any, then thank you very much.
Sure.
Appreciate it.
So on your agenda, you had
Yep.
the revolving fund article, and
Sure.
then Articles 5 through really 12.
Right, with Mr.
Derek
Brindisi.
mentioned in his budget presentation. So like Articles 5 through 10 are the operating budget articles. 11 is the contribution to the Facility Capital Stabilization Fund. Article 12 was the Nuclear Mitigation Stabilization Fund. And then Article 13 is the Capital Improvements article. So I didn't know if you wanted me to just sort of go over that one briefly, or?
I do, if we can kind of hit on them briefly. I just wanted to, in
Yep.
general, if we had any questions.
Sure.
Hopefully now we'll start sparking some more,
Yep.
more questions.
So in the email that we sent to you last week, we included the memo that we prepare for the capital improvement article, which is, in this annual town meeting, is going to be Article 13. And as you saw in the town manager's presentation, it mentioned the source of funding from revenues that we're going to do for roads, but one of the projects that's in Article 13 is the funding that we're doing towards roads. But there's several projects that were included in that recommendation from the town manager. The Capital Improvements Committee met in early January and reviewed and ranked all of those projects. And then at that point, we determine funding for those projects. So most of the projects, let's see, we're recommending at the annual town meeting, 21.7 million worth of capital projects. Free cash is going to fund about 12.7 million, borrowing of 4.7, general fund revenues of 2,650,000. That's the roads that he mentioned. Transportation network fee fund of 59,000, fire prevention revolving fund of 100, a police department grant of 202,000, sewer retained earnings of 360, and water retained earnings of 850,000. There's a list of all the projects that was provided attached to that memo that showed the ranking, and that memo actually includes articles that are going to be, that you'll hear at the special town meeting. So there'll be a separate article for special town meeting articles. There was 5 projects that are going to be presented during the special that were ranked and reviewed by the Capital Improvements Committee. But that'll be a separate night that you'll talk about those. And then we also provided a link to you, which is on the Capital Improvements Committee website, that is a link to all of the projects, the detail reports and backup that the departments provided for each and every project. So there's a lot there. I understand that, it's a lot to look at, but if anyone ever has any questions, you can always reach out to one of us.
I appreciate that. Before I ask my question, because it may get asked, I'm going to look within the room here, and then I do have a hand raised online from a committee chair. Not seeing any in here. Ms. Holmes, please.
Yes, hi. Hi, Lynn.
Hi.
I'm just very, very excited about all the time that you've spent going through all of this. And although there isn't a lot of questions here with the chairs this evening, I just want to remind everyone that, many of, and my dog wants to weigh in as well, many of the precinct members in Precinct 9 are watching tonight, and we have a lot of new members. So it's always very good to have you come before us and kind of walk through all the information we've received, because it's an enormous amount of information for a lot of folks, and you always do such an amazing job at helping us understand where the information is located. People are still really digging into all of this information, and I know that there's going to be questions at caucuses. So thank you for your time.
Yeah, so, and if there are questions, obviously, we try to put as much information as we can on the website to try to answer all your questions. But if you do have questions, you can always email us.
I guess just to kind of ask just a very quick question. When I was looking through this, one of the items and within the police department, it was the feasibility study for police headquarters. At one time in the past, we had spoken in regards to a possible combination facility with police and fire. Is there any kind of a little bit more background on that feasibility study that, what we're looking to do there that I could get? I see Chief Dana Flynn.
Uden Dana Flynn, Chief of Police. So, yeah, there was some talk at one time about some property down on Sandwich Road. However, I'm looking ahead. My 10-year capital plan is a new headquarters somewhere in the community. But in looking around, land is becoming less available. So this study is going to see what I can do on my existing land, potentially go up if necessary, so we don't have the huge expense of a new facility. We have opened a satellite office in Cedarville. We will be opening another satellite, hopefully next month or two downtown. So as the population continues to grow, our services are needed, everywhere. We're looking to provide the best service we can without spending a ton of money.
No, I appreciate that, but thank you. I was hearkening back to when we were looking around like the M Road area. That's where my question came from. Thank you, Chief Flynn. Is there still a possibility that we might need to look into a new Station 1, if you will, a new fire department headquarters? And at what point might we see that come into the budget here?
Hi, Neil Foley, Fire Chief.
Thank you.
So as far as Station 1, that's obviously something that we're going to have to address. Our focus right now is to try to prioritize our projects. As you know, we did Station 2 in West Plymouth. That was a great project. We're very happy with the results of that project. Did come under budget as well, which is great, considering it was bid during COVID. So that was a challenge, but we got through it, and we have a great project. And down in Manomet, we're back in that station. We still have a lot of work to do with that station, but that was the next priority, to get that straightened away and to be able to expand it so that we could continue to provide the services we need for that village, that area of town. And then our next priority is going to be Station 4 on Bourne Road. So we're currently looking at that. We're trying to come up with that timeline. We'll be coming back, probably in the near future with some ideas on that project as well. And then that's when we're going to have to start looking at Station 1, and then also looking at other areas of town where we might potentially need another station if we continue to grow and the demand continues to climb. We can't stop the growth. The phone keeps ringing. We got to provide services, but that's the planning right now.
Sure. Yeah, I understand you don't have a crystal ball on growth and all that, so I understand that. But
yeah,
I listening to you, I'm thinking probably sometime within the next 4 or 5 years.
Just to put it into perspective, we've had a growth in our call volume and our services, just in the emergency services, not in any of the ancillary public education, inspection, permitting, anything like that. Just looking at emergency response. And in a 10-year period, we saw over a 40% increase in need. So, the demand continues to climb. We're able to meet that demand currently, but there is going to be a time in the future where we're going to have to continue to grow to meet that growth.
Sure. Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Mr. Hutchinson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do you know the areas of the town that have increased most dramatically within the context of that 40% growth?
We've seen a lot of growth primarily in South Plymouth.
Right.
That has definitely been an area of growth. We continue to see continued rate of growth in, central Plymouth area, Pine Hills area, that area. And then our newest area that seems to draw a lot more of our call volume is the Long Pond Road area off exit
I'm sorry?
13. Long Pond off exit 13.
Yep. Yeah. In the context of projects, the Bourne Road project, do you have priorities for each of the ones that you cited just now? So, for example, you're getting a lot of calls from South Plymouth and from the Long Pond Road area. And so I'm hoping that would bump up that Bourne Road facility on the priority list. And it also mentioned, since I think Derek's still here, Town Hall South could be an adjunct to such a building.
So we have land on the Bourne Road area that is in a good location. It was part of the study that we did originally. And the current facility that we have there now just has enough room to provide an engine company, essentially. But we know that what we really also need to add down there is an ambulance. So, part of the need for the facility to build a new facility down there is to continue with providing fire services, but then also have EMS run out of that station as well. And also, if it continues to grow and we continue to see these multi-story buildings, then we're going to have to look at, other type of apparatus that we have. Wouldn't necessarily need to purchase additional, but we may need to relocate, like a ladder company into that area as well. But that's further down the road.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Chief Foley. I don't know if the town manager wanted to address the other piece to Mr. Hutchinson's question, or?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. There's something we've talked a lot about over the last 3 years, expanding services and how we deliver services. And I often joke that if you live in South Plymouth and you want to go see the town clerk and get a birth certificate, you have to pack a lunch. By the time you drive up here, find a parking spot, come into town hall, and then drive back down to South Plymouth, you're talking probably an hour round trip, right? So it's something we've talked about a few years ago. We looked at the Science House being one of those satellite town halls. We've talked about maybe the Cedarville Fire Station being a satellite town hall where maybe we only offer services in one of those two locations for a couple days a week, but we're a place where folks can talk to the town clerk's office, a representative of the town clerk's office, talk to a representative of the treasurer collector's office, pay bills, things of that nature. So it's something we continue to look at to see what's, without having to go break the bank, but we're looking at existing locations where we can open up a storefront.
Okay. Any further questions either online or within the room? Mr. Weber, and then Mr. Brewster, did you have one? Okay, Mr. Weber.
Thank you. Looking for some clarification from Finance Director Lynn Barrett. In her response to Mr. Brewster's average home and what is the cost increase. Lynn, is that cost number that you gave us based on Articles 7 through, and all the, also all the enterprise accounts, does it include the 21.7 for capital projects? When you say that the
Yes.
average cost to the average homeowner
Yep.
will be $310?
Yeah, includes everything.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Brewster.
Since Mr. Coyle is here and we were talking about roads, could you just give a little update and priority and where you see us going and how you're tackling the mammoth thing of roads?
Absolutely. Good evening, Bill Coyle, DPW Director. Also with me is James Downey, Assistant DPW Director. Last year, we had a very successful year. We, between pulverizing, resurfacing, and chip sealing. We tackled about 28 miles of road, which is a very large percentage of our roadways. And that was accomplished greatly in part towards the funds that were approved at town meeting. We had an additional $5 million last year appropriated. We spent every penny of that $5 million, and we're hoping again this year for an additional $5 million to be appropriated. And if that is the case, we'll be looking at about the same number of roadways that we will have in the plan. Still early, we're just going out to bid in the next few weeks for a project, and then James and I will be driving throughout town. We start with the plan that was done by Beta Engineering consultant. We kind of look at what are the worst roads, but we also keep in mind that we don't want to tackle always the worst roads first. You also have to keep your good roads good. And that's why we have a balance of the chip sealing, which is more of a maintenance preservation, and then also looking at some of the worst roads and combining them. And those might be pulverized or milled and overlaid. So again, we're hoping for about the same number of miles, roughly 25 to 30 miles.
Thank you. It's one of the big things when I go to my constituents and I talk about the tax rate, they're saying my road sucks. Why am I paying taxes? So I appreciate your hard work.
Sure, thank you.
Mr. Weber, and if you will, go ahead.
Thank you. Mr. Coyle, you mentioned, and we couldn't hear you up here, but you mentioned while the town manager was talking about the 28 miles of road you did last year, how it increased the road rating that we get from the basis on a lot of our budgeting on. What is the new rating?
I believe it was just shy of 70.
70.
So scale of 0 to 100, we're just shy of 70.
Right, okay. And do you remember what it was prior to you getting here? I think it was in the 60s.
Yeah, it was,
Low-
I think,
low
68 plus or minus,
Okay.
68.5. So I mean, it doesn't change. You won't see a 10-point jump in 1 year. It does take time because as we improve roadways, other roads deteriorate. So it's kind of a balance, but we're going in the right direction. So our goal is to keep going in that direction.
So if we've done 28 miles of improvements, what did we do as far as road acceptance in order to help us with our Chapter 90 state aid?
That, great question. That's something we're working on. I'll point out that in the past few weeks, we had Rick Bossy, our civil engineer, has now become our acting town engineer. And one of the things that we have charged him with is to work closely on coming up with a plan for accepting additional roadways. Because we do have a lot of demand and questions about how do we get roads accepted. And we have about 230 miles of accepted paved roads, probably about 73, 75 private paved roads. Some of them are maintained by an HOA. But there's always questions about getting roads accepted. So the concern would be is it's not as easy as saying, this is the road, let's go to the planning board, let's go to town meeting, let's have it accepted. You have to look at, first of all, what's the condition of the road? How was it constructed originally? Where are the property lines? Where is the right-of-way? Is the drainage within the right-of-way? Are the sidewalks within the right-of-way? There's so many things you have to look at. So we're trying to develop a process now, and over the next few months, I think that process will be moving forward.
So just a quick follow-up. In the past, we historically would see recommendations of roads to be accepted, probably every other year. So do you anticipate maybe next year you'll come in with some roads to increase the accepted roads and help our Chapter 90?
I think that's a safe assumption. I agree with you. My goal would be to try to get more roads accepted because, to your point, the more roads are accepted as town roads, we then begin getting Chapter 90 funds for them. But we do have to look at all those conditions I mentioned earlier.
Right.
So,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you. You want that? Mr. Riley.
Mr. Coyle, while you're up, do you know off the top of your head what number we're at for the excise tax that we receive from the vote? What was, I don't know how many years ago now we voted on?
Are you referring to Chapter 90 from the state?
Nope.
No, then?
Nope, this is.
Excise tax
I don't know how
out the-
many years back we voted to take the additional excise tax was brought on by Selectman Mahoney,
Thank you.
an article.
I'll defer to Lynn on that one.
So what we did, as part of one of our financial management policies, we have the Pavement Management Debt Stabilization Fund. And the town manager mentioned earlier that we had authorized at town meeting over $15 million worth of road projects, like every other year. We did 5 million, 5 million, 5 million. And those were all borrowed. And the excise motor vehicle excise tax that, the excess motor vehicle excise tax that comes in every year from what we budget to what we actually receive, we transfer into that fund at town meeting, and then we use that fund to pay the debt service for that $15 million worth of road projects. What we've been trying to do more recently, within the last few years, is use revenues right from the budget. Instead of paying interest, from the excise tax, we're trying to use actual dollars, either through free cash or through general fund revenues, towards roads. So this year, we are funding $5 million worth of road work, and 2.6 million of it's coming from the general fund revenues, and the rest of it's coming from free cash.
Sorry, from the rest of it, is that what the excise number, I'm just curious what the excise, what dollar amount we're kind of at these days?
Well, in total, the general fund revenue receives the motor vehicle excise, and we take in approximately between $10 and $11 million a year. So we're trying to dedicate as much of that money towards, DPW, highway, roads, everything, in our budget that would pertain to roads.
Wasn't that excess amount to go strictly to the roads?
Yes, and it does.
Okay, all right.
And it goes towards the principal and interest of paying off that $15 million worth of
Okay.
debt. Yeah.
Very good, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think I have one question, which, Mr. Weber, I may look at you. I call it the Precinct 3 traffic study because that's where it originated. At what point are you, or do you know at what point they're at with, presenting something that's going to go, that might end up in the DPW budget, roads, et
Yeah,
cetera?
I would defer to James Downey. He's in the audience.
Mr. Downey, you are up.
Precinct 3 has pretty much completed our
Sure.
shepherding of that issue, and
I wasn't at the last public
Okay.
forum on it, so I'm looking to, so Mr. Downey, please.
Yep, James Downey, Assistant DPW Director. In regards to this study, we are at the point where we're going to be on the Select Board docket, so we're going to be presenting March 4th. We're going to present the report. If we get approval from the board, we would then start using that report to start some additional projects.
I think everyone's hitting on my theme here, and it's going to eventually jump into the schools as well, is that we have a lot of large projects, and I think large numbers coming at us in the next four or 5 years, if not obviously in the immediate future. So I just want everyone to be paying attention. We have a lot of great projects that would improve this town, but we really have to start looking at which ones we select. And I appreciate the department and seeing the way Lynn presented this, especially in the Article 13 document, of the prioritized number for the departments. That helps me a lot as well. Are there any further questions, either online or here in the room? Oh, who's on? Who's waving? Oh, Mr. LaFrari is waving his hand. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mr. LaFrari. I was looking for the little hand raise thing. Go ahead, Mr. LaFrari.
Yeah, sorry about that. Thank you. This goes back to Chief Flynn and Chief Foley and maybe Mr. Brandisi. I'm curious, given the amount of land owned by the town of Plymouth, is there a map of any sort available that outlines these parcels? And additionally, would it be possible to overlay this with recommended locations from these studies for the police and fire stations to support planning efforts? Thank you.
Mr. Brindisi.
Sure, so I'll answer the first part of that question. We have a spreadsheet, it's approximately, and I mentioned this in the past, about 1,200 lines. And each one of those lines represents a parcel. There's no, and a parcel ID, there's no other information behind those. And this is all town-owned property. Some of it could already be in conservation, some of it could be in tax title, some of it could just be wetland and could be unusable. I've been working very closely with Hampton Watkins, who's the chair of the Land Use Acquisition Committee. The Land Use Acquisition Committee's primary function is to review only Chapter 61 properties and then make a recommendation as to whether or not the town and the select board should pursue the acquisition of that property. The Land Use Acquisition Committee has a article coming at the April town meeting to amend the charter that gives them the authority to go beyond the scope of Chapter 61 and assist us with looking at all other properties. So assuming that were to pass at town meeting and we're able to amend the charter, the Land Use Acquisition Committee has committed to me that they will help us go through each one of those 1,200 lines to determine where those parcels are, what use they could be, how large they are, so that we could then potentially look at disposing them. Maybe some of the departments need them for drainage purposes, things of that nature. So those are the ones that we don't know about. So the other ones that we do know about are the big ones, the one on Long Pond Road, the old water barn, and then 0 Spooner Street, the old fire station. The old fire station's going out to bid, I would say probably in the next 30 days for sale. And then the water barn, as you know, we've been kind of sitting back because that was always a discussion in the past that if we go potentially to a fire station 8 or some type of public safety complex, that may be a location that we may want to consider. And so for those reasons, we've held on to that. So that's where we are with parcels that are out there, and we'll continue to work on that.
Chief Foley, did you want to add?
Yeah, I'll just add a little bit to that. So using the Bourne Road Fire Station as an example, when we were doing our response time studies and looking at what was available and what public land that we already owned was in that area, there was nothing suitable. It's not just having a plot of land, you also have to have good line of sight of the road. Obviously, if you have emergency vehicles coming out onto the roadway, you want to make sure you have a good line of sight so the people that are coming down, we're not coming into their lane, causing a surprise. Obviously, we want to have a good line of sight on that. The current station has horrible line of sight, so clearly they didn't do that study when they did that station. But there was no parcels of town-owned land that met the requirements at that time. So, but it is part of our process when we're looking at it. And as the town manager alluded to, we have been holding on to the water barn. I've asked the town manager to hold on to that just for future planning, because that area right there is obviously very difficult to find any available land. Since we already have it, I just recommended that we hold on to it until we come up with a good solution.
Thank you, Chief Foley. Any further questions? Not seeing any. Thank you very much. Derek, did you want to present on anything further here this evening on these items? No, I'm sure you don't. But all right. Not seeing anything or any further questions on the articles that we have before us. I think we're all set, so thank you all very much, and then we'll move on to the other article that we have being presented to us this evening, Article 28. So I'll just give the room a moment so people can exit. Okay, again, I'd like to thank all of the department heads that took time out of their evening to be here. I really do appreciate it. Some of you got more questions than others, but we'll change that the next time, I'm sure. Moving on to and thank the town manager as well, and finance director for being here. I appreciate it. Thank you. Moving on our agenda, we're going to go to Article 28, which is a citizen petition. It's the public comment bylaw amendment. Mr. McKay is the petitioner, and he's going to be presenting this article to us this evening. So, Mr. McKay, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. George McKay, Chair of Precinct 8. Not acting as a chair of a precinct for this particular article. About a year ago, we talked about the charter in this room. And as part of the charter, if you remember, they wanted to add a requirement to have precinct caucuses held more frequently than the mandatory 3 per year. And I asked why that was so, and they said they're getting comments from the public saying we're not listening to them. And so that's why they put it in the charter, to demand that we as precinct chairs have more meetings than the mandatory 3. And I objected to that because in Cedarville, we have a very strong steering committee, and they have a room full of people when they have their meetings, and when I have my caucus meeting, we have very few attended. So I felt it was not appropriate to solve the problem that they were talking about. I felt it might be more, I asked Mr. Bolton, if we pass this as a town charter amendment or change, who would be the enforcer? I don't know, you probably remember what he said. Nobody would enforce it. But anyway, at the town meeting, we decided to strike that as part of the town charter. But at the same time, there was Mr. Donato tried to put forward an article, a citizen's petition at that town meeting that would require every precinct when they met to have a public comment section. And because he didn't dot the i's and cross the t's, that was called out of order. So that citizen's petition that he was working on it never made the floor for that town meeting. I tried to slip it in as part of my amendment to change the charter language, but that was ruled out of order also as out of the scope. So what we did at that town meeting is we only passed the charter revision that said there would be additional meetings by the precinct chairs at their discretion. That was beyond the 3 that are mandatory. So after the meeting, Al Donato said, look, I'm going to go to Florida. Would you like to pick this up for me? And since I felt strongly that he was going down the right track, I agreed to do that. So we started a new citizens petition late last year, and we got the number of signatures required to get it on to town meeting floor. And everybody, I assume, has a copy of what you have in front of you. I wanted to put something that had some teeth in it, not just say every precinct is required to have public comment when they have their precinct meetings. So you can see I put in about 3 sentences. One, I put in that a time limit on the requirement for public comment. And I did some research, and I saw that most people picked a 2-minute requirement. Some people had a 3-minute requirement. Some people had as many as 5 minutes required or allowed, not necessarily required. But anyway, I came up with a number of 2 minutes, and I thought that was something we should talk about. The other thing I put in, the statement that says public comments cannot be censored. And it was one issue to have a public comment line item, but if you have a line item that says you'll accept public comments, but then you start to censor them, it turns out that that's illegal. The state of Massachusetts has ruled you cannot censor public comment. And I was unaware of that when I was doing my research, And so I felt that that sentence should be in the bylaw change. So anyway, that's where I started. I got enough signatures to get it as an article. And so let me show you the history of what happened after. So this is just what I explained about the town meeting and where we are today. So anyway, that was all stricken, leaving the mandatory public comment issue unresolved. So here we are today, trying to resolve that. Under Massachusetts open meeting law, there is no mandatory requirement that public comment be allowed at open meetings. Most open meetings in Plymouth do provide for public comments. Most open meetings in every other town in Massachusetts do provide for public comments. Some don't, but most do. Some precinct meetings are held without provision for public comment. That's a fact. So where we want to be, we want to make it mandatory that all precinct meetings have provision in their agenda for making it part of the town bylaws so that all residents and others can be heard on all issues. So the first step in this was you go to the select board, which I did on the 21st of January, and they voted unanimously to move this article as written to town meeting. But they expressed some concerns. They expressed concerns on the 2-minute limit. One particular person on the select board felt that 2 minutes was too long and suggested that if we had a very high attendance at a precinct meeting, say 100 people or 50 people times 2, that would add an hour plus to the meeting, and it would be overly burdensome for the precincts. So anyway, those are the comments they made related to time. And in addition to that, some people made comments about the process of who should speak first during public comment. In the article I put on the table, I had a sentence in there that these are the people that should be allowed to speak first, these are the people that should be allowed to speak second, and then other people should be allowed. And I made both of those part of the article because in my research I felt that that made some sense. But when we went to the select board and made this presentation, they had other comments related to that beyond what I had put on as part of the document. So I wanted to share those with you tonight, even though they passed it on without asking me to make any changes. And so this is the result of their concerns. Their concerns was how to handle the speaker sequencing. And to be honest, I have no particular preference as to how you do it, but I wanted to give some guidance to precincts if it became a town bylaw. They expressed concerns about mentioning censorship, and the reason I put it in as a sentence that you could not do it was because I've been a precinct chair for a long period of time, having a public comment in my precinct meetings every time, but I did not realize there was a law on the table that you could censor them or could not censor them. So I thought that was an interesting comment, so I added it to the article. And I mentioned briefly about the time that people were given to do public comment, and I went back to my research on that, and I found that this is some of what other towns do. Plymouth Planning Board allows 3 minutes. Pembroke Townwide says 3 minutes. There's one, Brookline Public Schools allows 5 minutes. The only one I could find that allowed, well, there were two that allowed 2 minutes, Lexington Select Board and Wenham Select Board. But the interesting thing, I could not find any public comment laws that, of any towns I looked at in all of Massachusetts, that went under 2 minutes. So that's just some research I did, and it's for your benefit that I'm regurgitating this. And this is the court opinion of, well, not a court opinion, court saying you have to allow people in public comment to say what they want to say, and you can't censor them. So why did we go back to the top here? Oh, okay, I'm sorry. So we went to the Finance and Advisory Committee, and with the article as originally written, because the Select Board, although they had problems with the article, they passed it on uncensored. Probably that's a bad word to use at this point in time. The Finance and Advisory Committee expressed concerns about mentioning how to handle the speaker sequencing, and that was pretty much in line with the guidance that I was given at the Select Board. They also expressed concerns about mentioning censorship, and I gave you my logic for adding that sentence in there. They expressed concerns about clarifying exactly what public comment is and is not. They then had a discussion of how they should modify the article to go to town meeting. And when they started discussing how they wanted to revise the article, I felt very strongly that we should take the article as signed by the petitioners to go to town meeting, because I felt that some of these issues not only affected town meeting precinct chairs and their caucuses, but I felt it also impacted the public. And so I wanted to have a discussion at town meeting by town meeting members of all of the things I put in the original article that was signed by the petitioners, so we could have a discussion on the town meeting floor. The Advisory and Finance Committee decided that they would want to put their stake in the ground and change the article rather than let the article as signed by the petitioners go to town meeting floor. So that's what they did. So what they did is they struck the line that says public comment cannot be censored. They struck the line, the next sentence that said public comments are simply comments and they're not debatable. And they struck the last sentence on the sequencing of the public comment. And I objected, but I had no authority at the Finance and Advisory Committee meeting. So their wording preference is the shorter one that's listed at the bottom there. So I'd like to open this for comments by other precinct chairs, get their opinions, and see where we go from here.
Sure, and I will let the, thank you, George. I will let the COPC chairs know that one of the, call it co-petitioners of this article, Mr. Donato, has joined us online as well. So I think we can get a two-pronged approach to any questions that we might have. I think I'd like to kind of just open it up. I actually do agree with the Advisory and Finance Committee. I think the idea of saying residences, and actually I think the Select Board brought this up when I saw it presented before them, residences confused me as opposed to resident and the definition of that. So I understand removing that. I think that typically at a precinct caucus, which is what we're talking about, I understand the need to put where you were looking to go with putting them into kind of an order. But I think that at a precinct caucus, particularly during public comment, most of the time you're going to get residents of Plymouth or residents of the precinct. So that I understand the need to not necessarily have that there. The interesting thing to me, I think that I look at here is the 2 minutes and the definition of how much time should be allowed for each public comment. And I understand the concern of the Select Board that say you get 30 people 2 minutes, you're looking at an hour. But I also would refer to how I think a lot of boards and committees handle public comment, and I know in particular the select board does as well, which is if you start to hear the same repetitive argument over something, unless there's anything new to add, you kind of move on, and I think that's at the discretion of the chair, which that would have allowed, your original language, I think would have, if the chair did that, they might have been in conflict with censorship, because that may be considered censorship. So I actually think it's good that that censorship piece comes out of there. I understand the intent of it, but I think that if you have a chair trying to navigate repetitive public comment, they might run afoul of the censoring piece of that. So it's very interesting. It's been interesting to watch this go through. I am in full support of the article in its spirit, for sure. Are there any questions, comments? Mr. Brewster and then Mr. Begley.
My concern really goes back to needing this bylaw. Number of years ago, I believe Catherine had this initiative that we spoke of having a, not a handbook, but a how you deal with your first caucus for new chairs. And one of the things that we said is you need to have public comment. For me, the caucus is where the precinct people get together and the public is able to access them. My concern is that we need this. I would think that we, as precinct chairs, we should manage ourselves in a good manner where we have a good meeting, and I think everybody who's precinct chairs knows what a good meeting is. But if we need it, we need it. But I'm bummed that we do.
Mr. Begley and then Ms. Holmes.
One of my questions I had was just to do other, maybe it's coming off what Wrestling was just saying, but do other committees and boards have the similar bylaw requirement for public comment?
Can't hear you.
Speak into the mic. Is the mic on?
Thank you very much. Turn the mic off. The research I did went by it. The planning board has a document and says, this is what we think public comment is, and this is what we do. And I listed that at the top. What's interesting is the Plymouth Select Board has a policy by tradition, and it's not written. So this is my interpretation of what they do by tradition. They have a 3-minute limit on allowing people to talk. They do it in sequence of whoever they recognize first raises their hand. So there's not necessarily any particular instance of how you fit it in with a schedule or what have you. And if you watch well, before I get into that, my preference would be, to answer your question, that any board or any entity in Plymouth should have a policy, or there should be something in the bylaw that tells them what it is. In lieu of that, what the Plymouth Planning Board has done is they have a page-and-a-half document that says, this is the planning board's view of public comment, and it's a page-and-a-half. And the current law, and if you look at the bylaws, there's no requirement for any of the boards to do that. And so I'm not trying to dictate by this article what all the boards and committees do in the town. All I'm trying to do is say the 18 precincts that have meetings must allow for public comment at their meeting.
Okay.
And then, so that's the basis of the article. If you throw everything out because it's ambiguous,
No.
I could have written a sentence and said just what I said. One sentence in the bylaw that says when a precinct has a precinct meeting, they must allow for public comment.
Yeah, okay. So the answer though, right, George, was that there are no other bylaws for any other committees or like a codified requirement. They only have written policies amongst themselves or traditions.
Some are not even written, some are by tradition. Did you watch the Board of Selectmen meeting, the last one they had?
Yeah.
Where at the end they had public comment, and most of the people spoke on things different than what the Select Board had control over.
Yeah.
And this is the third time people have done that at their public comment part of their meetings, and you can see that the board was, I don't know, call it irritated because they were going down that path again when they've told those same speakers for 2 meetings previously that you're speaking to the wrong people.
Right.
If you
But
want to do this, go to
You're,
somebody else.
this, I mean, I'll just.
So anyway,
to say,
long way of answer. I think the Select Board is an entity in town which should formalize, but they don't have to.
Right. So, but what you just said, identified as a problem, isn't solved by this bylaw. Like the way that Select Board handled that situation isn't addressed in this bylaw proposal. It's not like, because we're not censoring or we're not like establishing the way we treat public comment. That was kind of Matt's point. That was kind of like, that's the discretion of the chairs as it is anyways. So, I mean, there should be public comment at every meeting. Again, when this was brought up last year, I was like, this isn't a thing already? Like, how is this not a thing? But more from a practice and like doing good governance sort of a way, and less of like a bylaw requirement way. But Mr. LaFiere is online. Haven't we been working on a town meeting handbook updates? Is this something that's more, to your point about having a written policy, that belongs in a place like that rather than a single body's bylaw change?
So before we get to Catherine, and I know, Pompey, you have something you want to say as well. Carmen, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but to answer that, the town meeting handbook isn't a policy book. The town meeting handbook is more, think of it as a user manual of definitions that they're working through, how our body of government is established, how you become a town meeting member. It's not a step-by-step guide to running meetings. Or I hear what Mr. Brewster was speaking to, and maybe Catherine, she's had her hand up because I know he referenced something she was looking for. But that's not really what the handbook is. Otherwise, we'd end up, if we start going down that road, the handbook's going to be longer than town meeting time, and I don't know how many people read that, so.
Yeah, and if I just may just wrap up with my thoughts on this, but I do agree with taking the residences out. That was a good catch by the Select Board. I think it didn't make sense. So I agree with that move and what the Advisory Finance Committee suggested there. Yeah, I guess some of the things that we've talked about before over the years when it comes to bylaw changes and stuff is sort of, just making sure there's like consistency and, the cleanliness of bylaws and stuff, and that, these are things that, this is a principle obviously that applies across any board that's serving in this community. And I just see this as that philosophical question there of, when we have this sort of conversation, it's like, yeah, it's obviously the thing to do and the thing to have, but doesn't that just apply to everybody? So why isn't this bylaw could just be for every public body in the town of Plymouth should have a public comment, which I would support equally, doing that. And sort of to set the tone for the whole town and not just this one body as, making it look like we're the only one with this problem. Which maybe we're not. So I just put that out there of like just, I love the idea behind it, but there's a little bit of a philosophical government thing and me political science thing that's a little confused by it.
Ms. Holmes and then Mr. Delafield.
Yeah, so thank you, Mr. Begley. Spot on. I think your points are really valid. I have a couple quick questions. How many precincts are not having public comment in their caucuses? Because I've been chairing the COPC for quite a while, up until last year, And I have attended and gone to many caucuses and read many meeting minutes of caucuses, and I'm not familiar with anyone, with the exception of one precinct that has battled with this over the last year. In, the 10 years that I've been a town meeting minute, or maybe even longer than that now, I don't even remember. But I just am trying to understand, what are we trying to solve here? And of all the problems we have in our government, is this what we should be focused on? So how many, George, did you do any analysis to understand in the last, say, 4 or 5 years, how many didn't have a public comment?
I didn't go through 5 years of precinct caucuses to get that number. But my opinion is that if one precinct has one meeting where they don't allow the public to speak, that's bad news. That's where I'm coming from.
Right, so, okay, fair enough.
And you said
So
you've seen one, so I think that's bad.
Right, but what I'm saying is that should be addressed with that specific precinct. A bylaw is a pretty, that's a big order to put before a town, especially to put it on a committee. So I am kind of struggling with that a little bit. But also, if the goal is to have public comment in caucuses for the chairs, I would have liked to have seen that just be where that ended. And that if you're going to go down this effort of putting a bylaw in place, that I don't like the idea of putting out the perception that we're being micromanaged or we're micromanaging public comment. So it's simple, have a public comment and let the chairs decide. That's what I wish that this was, and it would be a black and white, yes or no kind of question. But now, because there's all these policies that are built into this bylaw, I think we're going to have a lot of debate on something and spend a lot of time in a period where we really need to be focused on the budget. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Hold on, Mr. Donato. Thank you, Catherine. Mr. McKay, did you have anything to say to that before I go to Mr. Donato, who's also, I consider, a co-petitioner on this?
No, other than to repeat, if we have one precinct that has one meeting and does not allow the public to speak to them, I think that's bad. And this is trying to solve that problem.
I understand that, and I actually agree with that. Mr. Donato, did you have anything to add?
Yes, Al Donato, Precinct 17. I was not going to speak tonight. I was trying not to embarrass anyone, trying to be as dignified as possible. First of all, my original law was that all meetings in Plymouth would have public comment. However, the ZBA and Planning Board, they're an adjudicating board. Not everything can be heard publicly. So that's why I reverted back to the caucus. To my colleague, Catherine Holmes, that had brought this up again, I was not going to say this, but I had requested public comment for over a year. We had public comment till last February. We all know that very contentious battle over 16C. Public comment has not been on our agenda. I requested it from the chair. All my requests to my chair have been ignored, and I hate to say that tonight. I'm trying to be respectful to older people that have served the community. I can only tell you my experience. So I've tried to deal with this in-house. So in closing, I want to say, I had no choice to do this. I don't want to waste people's time. We all have better things to do tonight. It's common sense. Right. But sometimes when some people don't have common sense, unfortunately,
well, let's watch that piece of the conversation. I appreciate you putting clarity on the reasoning for your citizens petition and your article. I appreciate the history of everybody has a cause, everybody has a reason that they would put forth the citizens petition, and that's right. To kind of go back to Catherine's comment about we need to be focusing on the budget, but we get these citizens petitions, they could show up at any point. It could also be in the spring special. There's nothing citizen petition wise within that. And still while we do have important work to do with the budget, It is the rights of the citizens to put forth a petition, and it is the right and the responsibility of town meeting to debate it once it's going through the process. It's gone through the select board, it's gone through the finance and advisory, and now it's before us. And unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to view it, that is the process. Mr. Delafield.
Yeah, I think it's following along with what other people have said a little bit, but I do get worried. I've been involved with government work for quite a while. And once you put it into law, it's there, and you can do nothing about it. And when that is abused, it can be abused in other ways, like somebody, we talked about the idea that somebody can have 20 people come up and say the same thing over and over again. Once you've got it written into law, you cannot use common sense about where to go with it. So in terms of the intent of something like this, I think it's wonderful. The question is whether we really want to codify that in a way that reduces the flexibility for common sense when that's appropriate.
Are there any further questions or comments within the room or online for Mr. McKay?
Mr. Chairman, could I just add another remark? Would you allow me?
Yes, briefly, if you will.
I guess ultimately we have to ask here, and for instance, the select board brought back some warrant articles to me, to town meeting. To me, they have their opinion. To me, that's administrative when the select board. I've read the charter. I never felt that the select board could stop a warrant article. Maybe I'm reading the charter wrong, but that's administrative. This form of government is town meeting. So do chairs have the authority to stop? Are they more speakers of the House, a Tip O'Neill style, to block input from the caucus? My opinion is no. Town meeting is town meeting. The very meetings here in Plymouth were a fostering of the citizens, the candlestick maker, the baker. We are gathering of the meeting here, of town meeting here in Plymouth, of the issues of the day. Anything beyond that is for running a meeting like a referee. To me, a moderator moderates the meeting. We can overrule the moderator by a 2/3 vote. The authority is the body. The authority is the caucus. A chair is there to foster that, is to referee the meeting, not to call the meeting the way he or she wants. That's ultimately my question, So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Donato. Any further questions or comments from the committee? Not seeing any. Thank you, Mr. McKay, and good luck to you in your pursuits on this article. Okay. Great segue into our next agenda item. Is there any public comment this evening? Mr. Canty, please come forth. Are you coming forth as public?
I am. So, and I guess in relation to what you just talked about, how long is public comment at the COPC, generally?
So I have, since I've had public comment, or since I've seen public comment on here, it's a tradition I picked up from prior chairs. I have generally will allow for 2 to 3 minutes, just depending on the subject matter.
Mm-hmm.
We have not received a lot of public comments since I've been chair. Right. Not even a year yet, but yes. We do have some, but it's just been a few minutes.
Yeah.
And I kind of modeled that or continued on that time limit. Mm-hmm. I personally modeled it after how the select board handles it as well. Going to probably your next question, limiting debate. If I start to hear, my feeling is if I start to hear 5 or 6 of the same things over and over again, unless somebody has something new to add or a new point of view, then I would limit debate there.
Yes, so I appreciate that. So one of the issues that the select board, it was alluded to earlier, has recently been grappling with is, and we think it's important to have public comment, even if it's public comment that is critical of us, or even some public comment that has nothing to do with us, because Sometimes people don't know where to go to voice their concerns or complaints, so they come to the select board, and that's fine. But recently, we have noticed that there is a group that has a generalized grievance, and I'm not saying anything about the content of their grievance and the merits of that. There are avenues that they can avail themselves to remedy that particular situation if they would like to, and I would encourage them to do so. But they've been using the fact that we give them 3 minutes, and in fact have recently been giving people as much time as basically they want to finish, to sort of broadly discredit us and I think mislead members of the public into thinking we could do something that we cannot do, which doesn't serve, it distracts from what we can do. It frustrates the members of the board and takes up time on the agenda. And it also is, as I said, like misleading to folks, giving us a bad name for things that are not in our purview. Maybe that particular project should have been handled differently. I'm not saying it shouldn't have been, but I am saying we can't do anything about it where it is right now, and it's not the right venue or forum. And if it were only one person coming up for 3 minutes every meeting to talk about it, it wouldn't be that big a deal. But when you get 5 to 6 people and you're looking at sometimes 20 or 30 minutes about something that we have no control over, that can be draining, and it can be distracting, and over time it can be frustrating. And so we don't want to, I don't want to, limit public comment below the 3 minutes. Even for those folks, if they decide that they still want to come in and do that, you know, the select board, I think, is being the executive branch of the government. They have the ability to do a lot of things in the community. There is a value in having people be heard, even if we cannot directly help them. But I don't think we should be giving them additional time to generally disparage us. But in any event, putting that aside, if you look at, say you have a town meeting caucus, and you have like an agenda like you had tonight, which isn't even the whole warrant, and you have public comment where there's one particular issue that a bunch of people are going to come in and talk for a minimum of 2 minutes per person, that in the aggregate, because I'm the select board member that had an issue with that, because I think it can be distracting, and it can be can take up time that you would otherwise spend on other items. And I have noticed, I think any of you that have been around for a while have noticed, that if a meeting drags on, the things at the tail end of that meeting don't get the level of attention that they necessarily should, because people are tired, they want to go home. And that's true whether that's a Saturday at Plymouth North, or whether that's some evening here at Town Hall, or somewhere else in the community talking about
Mr. Canty, how much more time do you think you're going to need?
Excellent.
You're at 3 minutes.
I would take, if I could have 30 seconds.
Absolutely.
So that's a good example, is if you think you've heard enough from somebody, or you think you've heard enough about...
That is not what I was saying, Mr. Canty.
That's fine. But you should have the ability to have some type of management over that. So I would just, once it's on town meeting floor, I would consider looking at that 2 minute minimum, because it's not going to come up that often, but when it does come up, it's really going to sidetrack your meetings and get in the way of the other business that you actually have jurisdiction over, control over, and that deserve your attention, equally to the things that people are there about. So I appreciate the indulgence and the irony. So thank you.
No, thank you, Mr. Canty. We're not going to continue the debate on that, but we have not typically taken up debate during public comment.
I always give Mr. Canty at least 5 minutes.
There are a few members of the COPC. Maybe we could limit to 2 minutes speaking. I don't know. But yeah. All right. Any further comment either online or within the room? Do you have something regarding that, or do you want to bring it up in new business, which would be next, Mr. DiNardo?
On this topic here, and Mr. McKay's, just one quick question with our liaison for Robert's Rules of Order. What does Robert's Rules of Order have to say about public comment in a public meeting of our group or any of our precincts? Does it speak to it at all?
Well, our precincts aren't governed by, precinct caucuses aren't governed by Robert's Rules of Order unless, but we are, and I can have Pompey look at that for you.
Just,
Yeah, 'cause I honestly don't know the answer off the top of my
I
head.
just wonder if it might be in there.
Yeah.
It would solve the problem. And then the other question I had, and I guess it reads right both ways, but is it a minimum of 2 minutes or a maximum of 2 minutes?
It was minimum in the language that came from
Right, but is the right word maximum? Or does it matter?
I don't, yeah, I wish we had talked about this during the agenda item, but I think it does. Minimum and maximum, you're still going to hit that. I think it said maximum of 2 minutes. It says minimum of 2 minutes? Yeah, that would, so your maximum, you could filibuster at a caucus all night long if you'd like to. Right, yeah. So, again, things to look at, and if you want to submit to the moderator a change to an article, an amendment, you have the right to do so. We're still within the time frame. I do want to be careful of jumping back into an agenda item that we have since moved on from. So the next item coming up would be new business. So if anyone would like to bring up anything under new business, I'll allow that now. I know Mr. McKay had reached out to me, and he'd like to bring up some new business this evening. So, Mr. McKay.
Well, the new business I have is related to what's going on in Cedarville. We have a severe traffic problem at the intersection of Hedges Pond Road and 3A, and then we have a more severe traffic problem down at the intersection of 3 and 3A, and they're connected by Herring Pond Road, which at that point is not a town road, but is a state road. And when I moved down here about 15 years ago, I said, oh my God, we got to do something about this. And so two things happened. One, they decided to renovate and rebuild the bridges, which affects our traffic pattern, because in the summertime, when people go to the Cape, traffic backs up to our exit with people trying to get to the Cape, and they say, aha, I'm going to cut ahead of all these other people ahead of me. And they get off at our exit 3, and they drive down the back road, and they cut ahead of all the people that are ahead of them. So in the summertime, the traffic problem is much, much worse because of that. The bridges being built, now that they're funded, are going to create more of a problem because there are going to be traffic interruptions while they're doing the construction. I'm tying this into an issue that happened recently on Hedges Pond Road, where in 2018, there was an article put in front of the town meeting people that said, we're going to close the dump in the landfill on Hedges Pond Road, and we're going to have excess land. We're going to cap the dump, but we're going to have excess land. And what we want to do as a town is divide that excess land up into two parcels. One is conservation land, and the other is light industrial. And so I said, gee, if we're going to have people expanding the traffic on Hedges Pond Road, we should put a hook in the price, the sale price, and get some of that money allocated to fixing the problems on the intersection between Hedges Pond Road and 3A. And so the article was passed at the 2018 Fall Town Meeting. Now the property has been sold, and there's monies available to do the traffic mitigation part of the issue. The problem that has come about is what we authorized at the town meeting was to allow the town to sell that property and put $2 million towards traffic mitigation. That's, in my opinion, what we did at the 2018 town meeting. What has happened since then is the town sold part of the property that was zoned light industrial to the foundation, the Plymouth Foundation, for $1. And I can't find where that was authorized other than in the language that the town meeting voted on back in 2018, which should have been that we're going to sell this property and take $2 million out of that to mitigate the traffic issue. But they sold it for $1. Town sold that property for $1. Now they're trying to get, and have gotten, according to the records I can see, they sold, the foundation sold the property for $3.5 million, somewhere around there. That's a rounded figure. And now the foundation is going to give the town $2 million to solve the traffic issue related to Hedges Pond Road. And this is my summary of what I think is going on. That whole thing is currently being disputed by some of the people in Cedarville that are concerned about sand mining, some of the people in Cedarville and around there that have indigenous ancestry. And so the issue is completely screwed up, my words, or at least currently going through a big mixer. And that was part of the issue that Kevin alluded to. These same people that I mentioned are appearing at the select board complaining about what's going on in Cedarville, where the select board has no authority to make any change at all. But that's kind of a separate issue. The reason I'm bringing it up is we have a legislative oversight committee as part of our organization. And what I would like to feel comfortable with is that our legislative oversight committee would be looking at things like this so that they don't get passed by town meeting and then changed after that. And so I'd like to have the oversight committee comment on that, and I think we ought to talk about it as we go forward.
So I can refer that to Mr. DiNardo, excuse me, Mr. Costello, sorry, I had Al in my head, and sorry,
all right, no problem,
sorry
sir.
about that. I apologize to Mr. DiNardo and to Mr. Costello. I think that that is something that should be falling under the purview of the Legislative Oversight Committee. To add more of a wrinkle to what you're speaking about, the project is now being appealed with the ZBA, and they're having a public hearing on that on March 17th at 7 p.m. So I'm also not sure what that does with the whole, sale as well and the money there. So I think that it's something that the Legislative Oversight Committee should be tracking, and I know that they're getting together to organize their priorities of articles, because there are a lot of articles out there that we need to fall back on. But go ahead, Mr. Costello.
Interestingly enough, I did receive a phone call this afternoon on the very article you're speaking of, back in 18. I have archives of all the town meetings I've been to in my office. I haven't gotten to my office since the phone call, but I'll pull up everything I have, everything from that town meeting, all the scrap paper, all the notes, and it will be an agenda item on our next meeting, which will be the 6th of March. It's Thursday evening, I believe. So yes, it's going to be a high priority, Mr. McKay. We're going to review what we agreed to, what was put in front of us as a warrant article, and how the vote went, amongst other things. Whoever's interested can be involved that evening if there's further questions or input. I've also got a call in the last couple of days. I've researched between meetings here on the charter. The charter that we did vote on our last town meeting, that has not, at least at this time, made it up to the state level yet, but it will shortly. And then that'll take about a year, I'm being told, before it comes back. So we'll have a review on that at the meeting as well. So at our very next meeting, there'll be probably 4 or 5 hot issues that have surfaced here in town in the last couple of weeks. And the Legislative Oversight Committee, now that we're back on track, is sort of excited about getting to the bottom of some of these issues. So I'll keep you advised.
Yeah, thank you. There are 2 particular issues related to Cedarville that when you look at that, I spent all day Tuesday in this building with people that are supposed to know what went on. And all we found in terms of documentation was the original article that was put in, was going to be put on the town meeting floor, which says the town can sell that property. That's zone light industrial. The next piece of information which we found trying to search through the archives, there's a sale document where the town sold that property for $1. Yet the agreement made at town meeting was they were going to sell the property and take $2 million and give it back to people to satisfy the road problem. So how does the select board have the authority to sell something for $1 when the original assessment was it had to be at least $2 million? And it, in fact, sold recently for about 3.5. So that's one issue, I think.
And I'll leave that
Yeah.
piece as part of, call it your charge on this, if you will, as a question that Mr. McKay would like to.
I
have you
apologize,
guys
I'll have to
answer.
wait for the tape. I couldn't hear him down here, but I don't know the last couple of things he talked about.
Yeah.
Okay.
And just how that is possible when.
Fair enough, yep. I'll take it all into consideration. Thank you.
You good on that, Mr. McKay? Or, yep, okay, all right. And then, before I get to Mr. Weber, do you think that with your meeting March 6th, that I could put kind of an update from you as the chair of the legislative committee for March 20th? I know we're getting right before Springtown meeting, so if it's, but just even if it's a brief, I'm not looking for a
Oh, for March
20-page.
March 20th, certainly.
Yep.
I thought we were actually, I didn't take the time to look. I thought we might even be meeting the 10th.
We are meeting on the
Oh,
10th.
okay.
I'm putting that agenda together. I just wanted to give you time to digest, or if there were more questions that came out that you could get information from. I didn't want you to have to try and put
No,
it
no,
together over a weekend.
No, I appreciate that. Put us on the agenda for the 20th, and
Yep.
if I have something that I can fill in
Sure.
on the 10th, we'll do that.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
That sounds great. Yeah. Mr. Weber?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just for the record, so to prevent duplication of efforts here, at Tuesday night's Select Board meeting, Selectman Mahoney asked these same questions, and he asked for that information through the town manager to be compiled and brought back to the board, so that you don't have to do all the work, or you can just call up, I believe Mr. Mahoney specified that the town clerk should research the town meeting articles, and maybe Mr. McKay has already done some of that with the town clerk, but I believe that Mr. Mahoney has asked for an in-depth record of what the article said, who voted which way.
Correct.
And things like that. So, I mean, I'm just trying to help you. So
Yeah,
that-
he wanted basically the story of the whole.
The whole story.
The whole story.
The whole story.
Even if there were any amendments to anything, how those were voted upon. Yeah, he did request that. You're right, Mr. Weber. Thank you for that.
If I could
I think
just
we ought to get
comment
in
on
touch with
that,
him,
you're
because that
you're
was the
absolutely
concern of the
right.
caller.
And I tried to get a hold of John after the meeting because the work I did that day with the town people, give them a heads up and an advance on what they're going to be able to give him. But there are some missing documents, my words, because they're going to give him what they gave me. But it's a very good comment that we don't have to start from scratch to get this information.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Weber, Mr. Costello, Mr. McKay. Anyone else with any new business? I know I wanted Poppy to update the public comment question that you had, if you want to, Poppy.
Yeah, sure. Just looking up the overview of Robert's Rules of Order, it says for public comment, the rules state that comments should be relevant to the group's duties, respectful, and avoid personal attacks. The group can set limits on the number of speakers, how long each speaker can speak, and what topics can be discussed. Requirements for public comment: be relevant to the group's duties, be respectful, avoid personal attacks, relate to current or new items for discussion, and address remarks to the chair. Limits on public comments include group can set limits on how long each speaker can speak. The group can set limits on how many times people can speak. The group can set limits on topics that can be discussed. All limits must be viewpoint neutral. Public comments in government meetings, public comments is a designated section of the meeting agenda. Anyone can speak on any issue they want to during this session. Robert's Rules of Orders is a framework that helps groups hold orderly meetings. That's what it basically says. That's an overview of it. So I think it gives a lot of flexibility there as to how you...
It does, but, you know, that's for us, because the caucuses haven't adopted. But it's a great, again, it's a framework, it's a guideline that I wish all, you know, caucuses would adhere to, whether they can't really officially adopt Robert's Rules of Order, because they could be changing at any point, you know, their makeup. I think that was the last thing on new business, other than just to let you guys all know, online and here, March 10th, 7 PM, March 20th, 7 PM. If there are, I'm working with Kristen right now, putting together the agenda for both of these meetings. If there are articles that you feel need to be highlighted, I ask that you let me know that by about Monday or Tuesday of next week, just so I can line up whoever I need to bring in there. Otherwise, I'm doing this on my own discretion, so don't be upset if there's an article that you want to hear doesn't get heard, because just on our time, yeah, speak now or forever hold your peace. And then the last piece to this is I'll also start looking, I just printed it out. I know we got it a couple of days ago, the Springtown warrant, to look at what we might want to discuss on that as well. After that, any old business? Seeing none, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
All right, so moved, seconded, and all in favor?
Ah.
All right, good night. See you on the 10th.